Here I am, only from America, not back from Algeria or Egypt, but I am back from a place called Liberty University. I was there. Liberty University, for those of you who do not know, is the nurturing ground for the intellectual and advocacy leadership of the Christian right in the United States of America. It was founded by Jerry Falwell, the late Jerry Falwell, one of the leading evangelicals who moved from a fundamentalism that eschewed engagement with the political world to a fundamentalism that has tried to change the face of America. So I have my war scars and stories too. This also, point of personal privilege, this is the university from which I graduated. I came here from the outer borough of Queens, New York, from a Roman Catholic college and a Roman Catholic background, into the heart of Manhattan in the early 1960s. I started, with others, the SDS chapter in this university. I was arrested for the first time in what is now called Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza. That was my first encounter with the UN, demonstrating against the war in Vietnam. I had sex for the first time, and I used birth control for the first time. In short, I became a modern woman here. So this place has wonderful, wonderful memories for me. It was also a time, and my remarks are going to be wholly American. It was also a time in this country when God was dead. Time magazine told us so, right on the cover. We didn't think, most people, or at least at an elite level and in the cultural level, God was really not talked about. Religion was not a topic of strong interest. It was a time, as we know, when civil rights were reaching a very high point. People of color were understood in the social construction to be the same and equal to white folks, and women too were achieving their rights. What has happened to America, and how did this happen? I've always had the theory that a lot of it has to do with economics. I did go to the New School, and political economy was a big deal here. Those things happened at the tail end of the post-World War II period in an America of prosperity and hope. We felt as there were more jobs, more people were able to buy homes. The belief was clear that your children would live a better life than you lived. And that sense of economic security, in my opinion, can create, in some cases it doesn't, can create a social generosity. We not only can afford to give rights to others or acknowledge that they have them, but we can allow people to live their lives in the light of the way they think and in the context of their own needs. And we saw, as America contracted economically during the Reagan years, these people became afraid. And fundamentalists, religious fundamentalists who were afraid of what had happened, entered the political space and played on people's fears. Now we are again, we never recovered from the Reagan years. Now we are again in a period of great economic distress. And fundamentalism, again, religious fundamentalism, patriarchal fundamentalism, is very much on the rise. Those of us in the U.S. feel extremely challenged by what we face. We face attacks not just on women's reproductive health in the context of the decision to have or not have a child in relation to abortion, but we face an all-out assault on basic family planning services. We face a major assault on women's rights in the economic arena. And much of this is undergirded by that nice place I went to visit in rural Virginia 2 days ago. You would be shocked at the quality of the place, the space, the endowment, the faculty, the students, women, men, African Americans in significant numbers, all of whom have been called by Christ, explicitly called by Christ, to save America as lawyers, politicians, community organizers. They do not eschew community organizing at Liberty University. This is what is planned in this context. For women, I want to talk a little bit about the women I met, because I think this is important. I met a woman who, at the end, very sweet, from southern Kentucky, who, as we talked about abortion, when faced with it, said, I guess if women have to go to jail for having abortions, I prefer that to abortion being legal. I talked to a young man who, heartthrob, gorgeous guy, who had been treated badly as a child by his parents, abused, and he ended up in Connecticut with a family where the woman had had 15 children. 15 children, and adopted 3, and he was one of those children. And we talked about family planning, sexuality, and he said, as we hear many young men of that group say, a little controversial, a little mixed up here, well, if I had sex with someone before I were married, I could never respect that woman. I said to him, I think the first person you might want to not respect is yourself. What do you think about that? And he agreed. He said, yes, you were right. The first person is I should take personal responsibility for this. But you can see just from little tidbits like that, the challenge at the cultural level that we face in the United States in terms of values. I got it. Okay. Don't even bother to get up. I'm a lucky person. I don't write my speeches, so it's much easier to come to closure. So I want to spend the last 2 minutes talking about the UN and UN women. I slipped out a little bit this morning, so I didn't actually hear this, but it was reported to me that one of the questions that had come up in the context of UN women was the idea of a fifth world conference on women. And Dr. Bachelet said that it would be great to have such a meeting if we could advance the agenda and not be, in essence, stymied or, distracted at such a meeting by the kind of fundamentalist opposition those of us who have been active in the UN since before Cairo have faced. And I guess the question I have is, why should we be preoccupied with that? Should we be preoccupied with that? Have we in some way allowed? And certainly I would say the answer, this is a rhetorical question, the answer is yes. We seem to have allowed within the UN system religious fundamentalists from the Rio conference who didn't know anything about the UN prior to 1992, who refused to engage in the UN prior to 1992, to have a privileged space within the United Nations. And it is now time to simply not allow that privileged space to exist. This is not just a question of the Holy See having a seat in the UN and trying to take the word empowerment out of the documents for this Commission on the Status of Women. This is a question of the role of all religion within the United Nations, NGOs, as well as the more official bodies. It is time, it seems to me, for us as women, and if UN Women is a transformative agency, we should have developed by now the capacity to strategize on how to plan a meeting that cannot be derailed by those who disagree with the core agenda of the meeting. We can do this, and UN Women can and must lead the way, because fundamentalist religionists, and I'm closing with this, fundamental religionists have been more disruptive to the lives of women within the United Nations than in any other body. On an ancillary level, they have been disruptive to children. But essentially, they have worked hardest to create within the United Nations a patriarchal ideology that is structurally and institutionally consistent with a religious patriarchal ideology. And UN Women needs to do a lot of practical things. But the great thing, one of the great things that Thoraya Obaid did in UNFPA was to introduce a strong religious and cultural program. And in that context, I hope UN Women does the same, and I hope that it convenes the women of the world without fear and fearlessly to challenge any attempt of religious fundamentalism to hijack our agenda. Thank you very much.